Hello and welcome to Maulana Azad National Urdu University's Global Classroom. Today's lesson, John Milton's Paradise Lost as an Epic, is meant specifically for the first year MA English students. This particular lesson will act as a supplement to your paper on British poetry. If you have already studied the block on John Milton and his works, you would probably by now know that John Milton's early poems Il Penseroso, L'Allegro, his pastoral elegy Lycidas, so also his Greek tragedy Samson Agonistes are very famous works. John Milton, whose image you can see on the screen, is a 17th century English poet. John Milton became one of the greatest writers of English literature with his magnum opus, Paradise Lost. Paradise Lost is an epic. Before we proceed further, let us understand what we mean by an epic. An epic, as you can see, is a long narrative work in verse on a great and serious subject in an elevated style and centered on a heroic or quasi-divine figure on whose actions depends the fate of a tribe, a nation, or the human race. Milton's Paradise Lost follows all the epic conventions, and in keeping with the epic convention, Milton also begins his epic with an invocation. What do we mean by an invocation? An invocation is a prayer. In the olden times, when the classical writers like Homer and Virgil wrote epics, they began their epic with an invocation to one of the 9 muses. Who are these muses? These muses are the daughters of the Greek god Zeus and his wife Mnemosyne. Milton, as a staunch Puritan, could not obviously have started his epic with offering an invocation to one of the 9 muses. But then Milton had selected the epic for the form, so he still had to conform to the epic form. He had to include an invocation to start his epic. How then do you think Milton reconciled this problem of having an invocation in his epic? Well, it was not very difficult. Milton offered his invocation to the Holy Spirit or the Holy Ghost. He begins his Paradise Lost by saying, "Sing, O heavenly muse." The image that you see on your screen is an artist's rendition of the Holy Spirit. Having started his epic with an invocation, Milton goes on to another epic convention, and this epic convention, followed by the classical writers, is the presentation of an argument. What do we mean by an argument? By argument, we mean the presentation of the theme. To justify the ways of God to men is Milton's intention in writing Paradise Lost. Right at the beginning of Paradise Lost, Milton states his theme very clear, and with this we also understand that though Milton is writing his epic, this epic is going to be different from the epics written by Homer or Virgil in the classical time. His epic would be a Christian epic. Having looked at how Milton begins his epic with an invocation followed by an argument, let us move on to yet another epic convention that is followed by Milton. And this is the presentation of an epic question. The answer to the epic question sets the whole of the epic story unfurling. Now look at the epic question that Milton poses in Paradise Lost. He says, "Say first, for heaven hides nothing from thy view, nor the deep tract of hell. Say first, what cause moved our grandparents in that happy state, favoured of heaven so highly, to fall off from the Creator and transgress his will, for one restraint, lords of the world besides. Who first seduced them to that foul revolt?" With this question, the whole story of Paradise Lost unfurls. Paradise Lost, as we all know, is based on the biblical story of not just the creation of the world, not just Satan's rebellion in heaven, but also his temptation and the subsequent fall of man from heaven. Now that we know what the background story to Paradise Lost is, let us see how Milton takes us to yet another epic convention. The epic convention that Milton uses is that of medias res. What do we mean by medias res? Medias res is a Greek term which means in the middle of action. Paradise Lost does not begin at the beginning. When the story opens, we find Satan along with the fallen angels having been hurled headlong into the river of fire. We do not go at the beginning. We do not know how the world began. We do not know why this rebellion took place in heaven or why Satan and his followers are lying in the river of hell. Now you might have a question to ask. Why should a writer like Milton, writing such a great work as Paradise Lost, begin in the middle? Should he not start at the beginning? Well, no. This is an epic convention, and as we shall tell you in the subsequent time, one of the elements of an epic is that there is no scope for suspense. The story of an epic is already known to everybody. Don't you think the biblical story of the fall of man is known to everyone? Where then is the suspense? Where then is the need to start at the beginning? And therefore we have Milton beginning in the middle of the action in keeping with the epic conventions. After having hurled us headlong into the middle of action, Milton tells us, "Him the almighty power hurled headlong, flaming from the ethereal sky with hideous ruin and combustion down to bottomless perdition." And what do we find here? We find Satan lying along with the fallen angels in this fiery river of hell. So, we find Satan along with the fallen angels suffering in this fire which is sulfur unconsumed, which in spite of the bright flames still is darkness visible. So, Milton follows the epic conventions of beginning with an invocation, of laying down the argument, and hurling his readers headlong into the middle of action, just as Satan and his followers were hurled into this fiery river of fire. After having laid down these epic conventions, Milton follows yet another convention. And what is that? That is the journey into the underworld. We have already told you how, when Paradise Lost opens, it opens with the scene of hell. So hell is depicted right at the beginning. We find Satan with his fallen angels in this place, and in the course of Paradise Lost, we find Satan traversing the different regions, the earth, the chaos, hell, etc. So, in keeping with the epic convention, we have a journey into the underworld as well. One other epic convention is the use of a catalogue. In the ancient times, when Homer and Virgil wrote their epics, they made use of a roll call of the warriors. Milton in Paradise Lost presents the different fallen angels in the order of their protocol. Before this catalogue begins, Milton says, "Say muse, their names then known, who first, who last, roused from the slumber on that fiery couch, at their great emperor's call." With these lines, Milton goes on to present the catalogue of the fallen angels, and it is a long list. We have Moloch, we have Chemos, there is Astarte, there is Tammuz, Isis, Osiris, and a horde of fallen angels presented one after the other in the order of their superiority. So Milton is very, very conscious of using the epic conventions in the whole of Paradise Lost. Having presented to us the catalogue, Milton then also uses a number of allusions. I have already told you that Paradise Lost is based on the biblical theme. So, there are a number of biblical allusions. There are also classical allusions. There are allusions to the scientific world, to the geographic world, and of course, there are literary allusions as well. Milton then also makes use of digressions. This is a very important point. As students of literature, you might be wondering if it is right on the part of a poet to digress from the main theme. Why should Milton, whose venture is to justify the ways of God to men, digress at all? Well, imagine an epic is a long narrative work. It is written in several books. And if a work of art, an epic, runs into say 10 to 12 books, each book approximately of about 1,000 lines, won't the poet need to digress? Yes, digressions are definitely an important aspect of an epic. In Paradise Lost, we find Milton making use of digressions to present pagan rituals, contemporary places like Vallombrosa Valley, mythology, both Greek and Roman, biblical anecdotes. So, along with presenting several such allusions, Milton also makes use of epic similes. You might want to know what is a simile. A simile, as some of you may already know, is a comparison between two dissimilar objects as though they are one and the same, with the use of words like as if, as though, like, such as, etc. An epic is an extended simile. In Milton's Paradise Lost, there is the use of an epic simile to compare Satan to the Leviathan. An epic simile is used to compare the fallen angels to leaves in Vallombrosa Valley in autumn season. The epic similes are also used to compare Satan's shield to the moon as seen through Galileo's telescope, and his spear is compared to the tallest pine hewn out of the Norwegian hills. Now these similes are very, very interesting. Before I explain to you one of the similes, I want you to quickly take a look at a Leviathan. This here is an image of a Leviathan. A Leviathan is a monstrous sea animal which lies submerged, and the sailors passing by would mistake the Leviathan to be an island and anchor their boats. And then the Leviathan would shake its body and devour the unsuspecting sailors. So, to compare Satan's deceptive nature, Milton makes a very appropriate use of an epic simile. Having discussed the use of epic similes in Paradise Lost, let us now look at the use of Homeric epithets. There are several epithets in Paradise Lost. Satan is called infernal serpent, Eve is referred to as the mother of mankind, and Chemos is referred to as the obscene dread of Moab's sons. All these epithets add to the exalted language that Milton uses in Paradise Lost. They also allow scope for better interpretation of these different, whether it is a serpent, the mother of mankind, or one of the pagan gods. The next epic convention that Milton follows is that of the use of formal speeches. Homer's and Virgil's epics are full of formal speeches. So also in Paradise Lost, even in Book 1, there are a number of speeches delivered by Satan. Some of these speeches begin thus: "If thou beest he, but oh how fallen! Fallen cherub, to be weak is miserable, doing or suffering. Is this the region, this the soil, this the clime?" Well, there are several such speeches in Paradise Lost. And in Book 1, when we encounter Satan addressing either Beelzebub or the other fallen angels with some of these speeches, we find that the speeches are extremely formal, and Milton is very, very scrupulously following the epic convention of inserting formal speeches in his epic. One other use of an epic convention is the presentation of Deus Ex Machina. What do we mean by this term? This is also a Greek term which means God in a machine. It is used to bring the supernatural element into a work of art. In Milton's Paradise Lost, there is God himself, there are angels, there are fallen angels. So, there is no dearth of the use of the Deus Ex Machina. If you are clear up to this point, let us proceed further. Milton's Paradise Lost is spread on a vast canvas. We have already told you how Milton's intention in writing Paradise Lost was to justify the ways of God to man, and the whole history of mankind, the spheres of heaven, earth and hell are all covered on his canvas. The biblical story of the creation of man, of Satan's rebellion, of the temptation of Eve and Adam, and the subsequent fall lends a very big canvas for Milton to work on. And Milton, without any hesitation, makes full use of this epic convention. Another epic convention used is the use of inversions. Look at these examples. What in me is dark, illumine. Him the almighty power hurled headlong, and him thus answered soon his bold compeer. If you looked at these sentences carefully, you would have noticed that the usual word order is inverted. Milton, with his fondness for Latinized expressions, and of course, in keeping with the epic conventions, makes several such uses of epic inversions. An epic, as we told you right at the beginning, is of national interest. This story of the creation and the fall of man is of interest to not only England, but to the whole of the European world and across the world. Milton's Paradise Lost thus deals with a topic that can be of interest to any nation at any period of time, and even today, in the 20th century, we continue to read his Paradise Lost. The next epic convention that we should look into is the division of an epic into several books. While Homer and Virgil made use of different number of books, Milton's initial publication of Paradise Lost had 10 books, and then in the subsequent revised edition, Milton increased the number of books to 12. So, the number of books that Paradise Lost is divided into is 12. And now you know why it is imperative for Milton to make use of several allusions and digressions. He had to add body to his books. But then Milton was not haphazardly adding these allusions and digressions. Every time he was alluding to something, or every time he digressed from the theme, it was also to make the readers aware of his vast learning. Yet another technique of an epic is the presence of a superhuman or a demigod. And who do we have in Paradise Lost? We have God himself, we have Satan, we have Adam and Eve, and a whole lot of supernatural beings. Flashback is yet another technique that is used in an epic convention. The story of Paradise Lost begins with the rebellion of Satan in heaven. On your screen is an artist's depiction of the good angels fighting with the bad angels and trying to hurl them out of heaven into hell. This technique of flashback is essential because, as we told you earlier, the epic started in medias res. Because we never went to the beginning, this technique of flashback tells us how the things happened at the beginning, what happened at the time of the creation, why did Satan rebel against God, how did the battle take place, and then how did Satan and his fallen angels think up a scheme, how did they tempt Eve and Adam, and what happened in many other such incidents. In the course of my talk, I have already told you how there is no element of suspense. We had talked about this time when I told you that the epic begins in medias res. Why is there no element of suspense in Paradise Lost? Yes, as I told you earlier, the story of the creation of the world, the advent of man on earth, is already present in the Genesis of the Bible. So, the whole of the Christian world is well aware of Milton's plot. They know how the story would proceed. Therefore, we find that there is no element of suspense in Paradise Lost. There are a few more epic conventions that Milton follows. One such epic convention is the use of exalted language. Milton, in keeping with the epic tradition, makes use of exalted language. We'll look at a few examples. If thou beest he, but oh how fallen! What though the field be lost, all is not lost. A mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven. Now this kind of language is extremely formal, is extremely exalted, and a necessity in writing an epic. Apart from using exalted language, Milton also makes use of an elevated style. Milton's style that he adopted throughout Paradise Lost is the use of blank verse. He uses verse without any end rhyme. In fact, Milton's style is popularly referred to as the grand style. Having looked at all these epic conventions, we come to one final epic convention, and that is the presence of an epic hero. But this is the most controversial aspect in Paradise Lost. Who is the hero of Paradise Lost? Is it God? Is it Satan? Is it Adam? Who could be the possible hero of Paradise Lost? In fact, Blake, one of the pre-romantics, felt that Milton belonged to the devil's party, that Milton had unintentionally made Satan the hero of his epic. But do you think Milton, the staunch Puritan, could have in any way made Satan the hero of Paradise Lost? Well, there are certain references that you can allude to. Milton is compared to the Leviathan. His shield is as huge as the moon seen through Galileo's telescope. His spear is taller than the tallest pine. In other words, Satan is depicted as a gigantic being. If this gigantic being was very easily defeated by God, do you think Milton still intended Satan to be the hero of Paradise Lost? Well, I'm not going to give you the answer. Continue to think, also wonder if Adam could possibly be the hero of Paradise Lost, because after all, the theme of Paradise Lost deals with the fall of man. Eve was tempted by Satan. In turn, Adam was tempted, and both of them, for their disobedience in having tasted of the fruit of the tree of knowledge, were thrown out by God onto earth. So could it be Adam who is the hero of Paradise Lost? Now again, I'm not going to give you the answer. There is yet another possibility. Do you think God could possibly be the hero of Paradise Lost? Milton's intention, as we told you in the beginning, was to justify the ways of God to men. So is God the hero of Paradise Lost? Keep thinking, and next time you go to your study center, feel free to interact with your counselor in English and find answers not only to this question of who could possibly be the epic hero of Paradise Lost, but you can have an interactive session on the different epic conventions. The conventions that we have studied today are the use of an invocation, the presentation of an argument, the beginning in medias res, the use of a catalogue, the use of allusions, digressions, flashback technique, and several such examples like epic similes, Homeric epithets, the presence of an epic hero, so on and so forth. If you think the class today has been of use to you, you can possibly go back to reading the blog on Paradise Lost, Milton and his works once again. It is not just Paradise Lost that may be of consequence to you, but go through the other works written by Milton as well. You have Lycidas, the pastoral elegy prescribed for your study. Go through it and see the kind of style that Milton adopts. You can read the sonnets of Milton written in the Petrarchan style and see how each one of these add to the greatness of this great poet. So, after having looked at Milton's epic Paradise Lost, which is his magnum opus, I am sure you are now inspired to look into not just all the other works written by John Milton, but to the 17th century English poetry and of course to the whole of British poetry. I hope you have enjoyed this session with me, and until we meet again next time, this is Dr. Gulfisha Habib, Reader in English, Directorate of Distance Education, Maulana Azad National Urdu University, signing off. Goodbye.